Hello, and welcome to my life. That sounds a little bit extra, but I figured like after the past couple of videos that we've done, you guys are a part of my life. Like you've seen my birthday, you have been to the grocery store with me, you've come to my favorite place, you have met my friends, we've gone to weddings together, we've done a get to know me Q&A. I think we're on the level where you are a part of my life right now, and that's okay. Like if you're a first-time viewer, welcome. My name is Bethel. And I'm happy to see you. Well, I'm happy that you can see me, and I'm hoping that we get to see a little more of each other. Yes, so I'm gonna get right into today's video. I am hoping that this doesn't take too long. Like I'm trying to keep this concise, but I might just get passionate. Judging by the title, you will see that today is one of those videos where I share with you guys something that's been on my mind. And this is a thought that's been on my mind for a while. Right, so in March, I did the Bible in 30 days challenge. So what happens in the Bible in 30 days is you attempt to get through the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation in 30 days, and I was successful. Reading through Genesis, I realized that there were many examples of couples who had had children over the age of 100, right? So people were living up until 405 and all of that crazy stuff that is unheard of today. And so I was asking myself this question. I was like, Lord, but how is it that Abraham and Sarah are such a big deal for having Isaac at the age of like 100, and Abraham was 100 and Sarah was about 90? Why are they such a big deal when this was normal in that day and age, right? And so for the past couple of months, I sort of forgot about that question. And then last week I was having a conversation with my housemates, and then it popped back into my mind. I asked them, I was like, I actually have been wondering about this for a very long time. So lo and behold, yesterday I was doing my Bible reading, and I follow the SOAP method by Robert Ferguson. I'll put the name and stuff in the description box so you guys can read up on that if you're interested in it. And so I was reading Genesis 18. Now in Genesis 18 is a story of when the three men, which I assume or interpret to be the Godhead, visit Sarah and Abraham. And so they host them, Sarah and Abraham host the three men, and then God starts to say to Abraham that next year this time I will come and your wife Sarah will have a son, right? And so at this point we know that they're about 99, 100, and God gives them this promise, and Sarah is like sitting in the tent next door and she like chuckles. It actually says that she laughs silently, and then because God is savage, I mean that in the best way possible, he's like, did she laugh? That's so funny. But yeah, so this is the premise or the preface rather of my thought that I'm going to share with you today. But the thought or the question that I was wondering is, why is it such a big deal that they were 100? Because everyone else wasn't. They were having kids and that was normal. So why is it such a big deal? So in doing my Bible study yesterday, the question popped back up into my mind. And so I decided that in addition to Genesis 18, let me just flip back a few pages and see what's actually happening. Right, so in Genesis 11 verse 30, I discovered that it actually says that Sarah was infertile. So it says that Sarah was unable to bear children. She was infertile. So the reason that she didn't have children up until this age is because of infertility, right? I mean, there were many couples which I've spoken about that did have kids well into their old age. And so age is not necessarily the thing here. The thing here is the infertility that Abraham and Sarah had been familiar with for 100 years, right? And I reckon the reason why age is such a big deal in this story is because it signifies how long they had to wait or how long they suffered with this infertility. I reckon at this point she had started to become familiar with it. You know what I mean? She was like, oh look, there's no way out of this. Like much like the woman with the issue of blood, she was bleeding for 12 years. That was probably the biggest thing. Like she was probably starting to get comfortable with it. And I imagine that the same was happening with Sarah and Abraham. Like, we've been infertile for this long, we're not having kids, this is it, like we're stuck in this condition, right? But God being God, as you and I would know, he has a massive sense of humor, right? I mean, who chooses the husband of an infertile woman to be the father of many nations, right? And as if that's not enough, who chooses an infertile woman to be the mother of many nations, right? I think God is like absolutely hilarious. And yeah, like I've said, at this point, I imagine that they had become familiar with the situation. I imagine that they had gotten through the phase in their marriage where they were still becoming acquainted or becoming okay with the fact that they can't have any children. You know, I imagine there were like a couple of years in their marriage where it was awkward, and then there were the years in their marriage where they were trying and still no children. And then I imagine that at this point they've gone through all those phases, and now they've just like, you know, become okay with it. Like, this is it, we're not having children, this is it for us, like we're infertile and that's that. And it's at this point that God comes and he sort of flips the script on them. And I love that he challenges their faith. Like, God is so hilarious. He challenges their faith and he asks them in Genesis 18 verse 14, is there anything too hard for the Lord? Right? And I feel like he's almost saying, you've gone this long with infertility, but is that an excuse for you to stop trusting for a baby? Like, is there anything too difficult for the Lord? Right? And I think that's such a tricky question, because he says, is there anything too hard for the Lord? And I imagine if Abraham had said yes, that means, okay, look, your whole theology is incorrect, whatever. But if he says no, there's nothing too hard for the Lord, that means he needs to increase his level of faith to match what God is saying. Do you know what I mean? So either way, you're sort of stuck. It's like incorrect theology, or I need to increase my level of faith, something that I've probably stopped believing for because I've gone this long without it. I've started to think that it's impossible. I've become okay with it being impossible. And then God walks right in at Genesis 17 and then in Genesis 18 and says to them, is there anything too hard for the Lord? Right? And I love, God gives them new names. Almost like he's detaching them from this identity that linked them to this infertility, right? He says, okay, you will no longer be Abram, the husband of an infertile woman. Your name is Abraham, because you are the father of many nations. And he says the same thing to Sarah. He says, you will no longer be Sarai, the infertile woman, but you will be Sarah, the mother of nations. I mean, okay, I'm possibly getting too excited, but I love that God can do that. I love that God can walk in just when we have become okay with the conditions and the labels that have been placed on us. And he flips the script and he says, this identity that linked you to this infertility, that's it. Like, you are no longer that person. Forget the former things. We're walking in the newness, right? Which reminds me of that exact scripture in Isaiah 43 verse 18 to 19, where he says, forget the former things because I'm doing something new. It gets crazy in verse 19 when he says, I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. Things that in our minds seem impossible, especially if you've had to live in them for as long as Abraham and Sarah had to live in infertility, right? And I guess the question and the challenge for you and me is there anything too hard for the Lord, right? What are those things that we have stopped praying for because we have just become okay with the fact that, okay, look, this is taking forever, or this is never going to happen. I mean, I've gone this long without this, so this is probably not the will of God for my life. Or, you know what, I'm just done praying for this person's salvation because they've decided that this is not the path that they're going to take. Or maybe you're believing for a baby and you're married and you've been trying for so long, but this is not happening. Or you stop trusting that you can get a house. You stop trusting for a job. Maybe you stop trusting that God does in fact have plans to prosper you and not to harm you. You know, what are those things in our lives that we have stopped praying for, or that we have become okay with not having just because they're too difficult for us? And the question and the challenge on those things then is there anything too hard for the Lord, right? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? I can imagine that Sarah was so over this. And I totally identify with her, first of all, for constructing or orchestrating the whole thing for Ishmael to be conceived. I totally identify with her for sitting in the tent giggling, because I mean, what the heck, right? You've gone this long in your life being labeled and being known as infertile, that this has become a part of your identity. But I love that Jesus comes in and he changes her identity so that the promise that he bestows upon their lives is possible, right? And I wonder how many of us have identified ourselves with the things that are not in line with the promise of God. So the miracle isn't that she had had a child at the age of 100, but rather that she was infertile for 99 years, and yet somehow she still managed to become the mother of many nations. And I love that God uses the least likely. I love that he fetches, or he chooses, a woman who was probably deemed infertile or probably known by her infertility in society, and he uses her to be the mother of many nations. I love that we are descendants of a woman who was infertile for 100 years, right? And which brings me to this question again: is there anything that is too hard for the Lord? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? Or have we started to consider things to be too difficult for God because they're difficult for us? Have we forgotten that the Word of God says what is impossible with man is possible with God? Have we forgotten that He is the God who makes a way where there seems to be no way? I wonder if we can start to take the Lord at His word. I wonder if we can challenge our level of faith by asking ourselves the question: is there anything too hard for the Lord? That person that has been sick for months and months or even years, and you've been praying for them and there's still no healing. That person who you've been praying for to get saved and has been years and years and years and they're still not saved. Your job situation, your family situation, your financial situation, those things that you have possibly stopped trusting God for. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? And I hope that the answer that you resolve in your mind is no. And that might not be the case right now, which is also okay. But I still want to challenge and ask us, is there anything too hard for the Lord? And with that, I'm just going to close this video right here because I don't want to make it too long. Like I've said, don't forget to like, to comment, and to subscribe. And if you've got any testimonies similar to that of Sarah, similar to that of woman with the issue of blood, please share them down below. If you've got questions or anything like that, let's chat, let's do life together. But most importantly, thank you for watching, and see you in my next video.